Take care of the leftovers, will you? With those words, a cold plate was pushed in front of me. The soft clink of my fork hitting the plate echoed through the living room. In front of my husband was steaming meat and a bowl of warm rice, and there I was again. Sitting in front of yesterday's leftovers. I endured it. I felt small and hurt, and at some point the thought hit me that in this house, my existence was worth less than cold scraps on a plate. That day, I quietly put my fork down and decided to set my own table for my own life. Why I finally found the courage to do that, I will tell you now. You're listening to Silver Story Tree, where the voices of life's late chapters gently bloom again. Subscribe, like, and turn on the bell to hear more heartfelt stories that grow with time. It was a rainy Sunday evening in Tacoma, Washington. Gray clouds hung low outside the old kitchen window, and a football game broadcast echoed from the living room TV. The sound of rain tapping against the window filled the air. I sat at the dining room table, watching my mother-in-law Margaret take a piping hot meatloaf and roasted potatoes fresh from the oven, placing them on a large plate in front of my husband David. Steam rose from the dish, and the aroma filled my senses. My mother-in-law said, "My son works so hard. He needs to eat properly." And then, in front of me, she set down a small plate with yesterday's macaroni and cheese, wilted salad, and rice that stayed lukewarm even after being microwaved. The edges of the plate had yesterday's sauce dried and hardened on it. My mother-in-law added, "Helen, leftovers are food too. At your age, you should watch your diet anyway. This is plenty." My husband smiled awkwardly and took a large bite of the hot meatloaf. "Mom's cooking is the best," he said. Those words sounded distant to my ears. I picked up my fork, then stopped over the soggy salad. Looking down at the plate, it felt like I'd inherited someone else's scraps. I muttered to myself, my life feels like this too. Like someone else's leftovers. On the living room wall hung our wedding photo from 30 years ago, taken in a Tacoma backyard. Young Helen and David smiled, looking in the same direction. We were truly happy then. I believed we'd have a home together, that we'd build our own life. On the shelf below were stacks of mail addressed to the homeowner. All of it was addressed to Margaret Collins or David Collins. My name wasn't anywhere, even though I'd lived in this house for 30 years. Then my mother-in-law spoke again. "In the end, all a person leaves behind is their house. This house will go to David no matter what. A daughter-in-law can be replaced anytime." The moment those words hit my ears, the fork trembled in my hand. I heard something crumbling inside my chest. I quietly set the fork down on the table. The small sound of metal hitting wood echoed in the room. "I'll be right back," I said, heading to the bathroom. As I closed the door, I saw my face in the mirror. Helen Parker, 67 years old. Someone who'd maintained this household for a lifetime, but meant nothing in this house. I turned on the faucet and splashed cold water on my face. Water droplets ran down my fingertips. Tears pooled in my eyes in the mirror, but I couldn't cry. If I cried, they'd just say I was being overly sensitive again. I remembered 30 years ago, when we lived in a small apartment outside Seattle. I worked washing dishes in a downtown restaurant kitchen, doing night shift prep work, saving money. That money went toward the down payment for the Tacoma house. I believed it was for our home, but my name never appeared on the property deed. It was solely owned by my mother-in-law Margaret, with David's name added later. I recalled everything I'd done in this house. When Margaret collapsed with heart disease and was rushed to the hospital, I was the one who spent nights on the hospital cot. I handled the medical bills, picked up medications, managed rehabilitation schedules. The church elders said, "That's what a daughter-in-law should do." I couldn't tell if it was praise or obligation. I just thought it was my duty. Preparing dinner, cleaning, laundry, grocery shopping, all of it was my responsibility. My mother-in-law always said, I should do at least this much after she sacrificed so much raising her son. My husband David would say, "All the money I earned driving buses went into this house's mortgage. I'm the one who's had it hardest." I also worked at supermarket checkouts, later moving to deli kitchen assistant work. Most of my paycheck went to living expenses and medical bills. But nobody acknowledged that. They thought it wasn't visible contribution. Outside the bathroom door, I heard my mother-in-law's voice. "Helen, aren't you eating? You should finish even the leftovers. It's wasteful to throw them away. I opened the door and returned to sit at the table. As I picked at the cold macaroni and cheese with my fork, I thought my life, like this plate, has only been filled with what others left behind. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat on the old sofa in the living room. Only the sound of rain and the refrigerator motor hummed quietly. Looking at the headlights of city buses passing on the road outside, I thought like those buses. My life has only changed stops, never direction. All I had was a personal checking account I'd opened years ago with almost nothing left in it. That was the only thing with my name on it. Even after living in this house for 30 years. Several days passed after that. I prepared breakfast as usual, did the dishes, ran the laundry. But something had changed. Everything in this house started looking different to me. Every kitchen cabinet, the living room sofa, the bedroom curtains. Things I'd chosen, cleaned, and organized, yet nothing was actually mine. That realization hit my chest anew. One afternoon, I opened an old drawer. Photos from 30 years ago when we lived in that Seattle apartment appeared. We were both young, our bank balance was small, but we were full of hope. David used to say, "Soon we'll have our own home, Helen. We'll build it together, you and me." I believed those words. That's why I washed dishes in that Seattle downtown restaurant kitchen. I woke up at 5 in the morning to catch the 6 o'clock bus to work. My hands were always rough from detergent, and the smell of grease soaked into my clothes so deeply. I'd shower twice when I got home. After moving to night shift prep work, I worked until 10 at night. On late buses riding home alone, I'd look out the window, thinking just a little more savings and we could make the down payment on our home. The money I saved was $5,000. It was a lot for me then. I handed it to David. "Use this toward the down payment," I said. David thanked me, but when it came time to sign the house contract, my name wasn't included. My mother-in-law insisted the house be in her name, for tax purposes and convenience. Back then, I accepted it. I thought, we're family, what does it matter? It's a house. We're all living in anyway, so whose name is on it? But as years passed, I felt it. Having no name meant having no existence. Margaret's heart attack was 15 years ago. The ambulance siren still echoes in my ears. I remember filling out insurance paperwork in the emergency room, waiting area with trembling hands. The doctor said long-term hospitalization and rehabilitation would be necessary. A caregiver needed to stay by her side constantly. David couldn't come to the hospital during the day because of his bus driving schedule. So I slept on the hospital cot. My back ached, but it was bearable. I helped my mother-in-law to the bathroom when she woke at night. Held her hand until the nurse came. Even after discharge, I handled everything. Medication schedules, hospital appointments, rehabilitation therapy. Schedules, dietary management. Each day felt like a battle. At church, the elders would say, "Helen, you're amazing." Not every daughter-in-law would do that much. Those words sounded like praise, but felt like weight. Everything I did seemed to be treated as natural obligation. Nobody was grateful. My mother-in-law would say even after recovering that she'd sacrificed so much. Raising David and a daughter-in-law should do at least this much. Many hospital bills were charged to my card. David said he'd pay me back later, but he never returned even half. It was just forgotten. I felt awkward bringing it up first. Worried they'd say I was being money-focused, so I stayed quiet. I kept working too, part-time at supermarket checkout. Later moving to neighborhood deli kitchen assistant. The pay wasn't much, but it supplemented living and food expenses. But David always said, all the money I earned driving buses went into this house's mortgage. I've had it hardest. The money I earned was treated as invisible. Living expenses, food costs, medical bills were just taken for granted, like air. Nobody cared that it came from my paycheck. I thought again about the property deed. I'd thought about checking at the Pierce County Recorder's office someday, but kept putting it off. I think I was afraid to check. I already knew my name wouldn't be there. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. David snored beside me. He was next to me, but not on my side. That's what I felt. Rain fell outside the window. I heard raindrops drumming on the roof. Listening to that sound, I thought rain is falling on my life too. Rain that keeps falling without stopping. The next morning, I got up and prepared breakfast as usual. My mother-in-law came out of her bedroom, saying, "What's for breakfast?" "Make something David likes." I made bacon and scrambled eggs. David's favorite. When I placed it on the table, my mother-in-law picked out the biggest piece of bacon and put it on her son's plate. In front of me sat a slice of bread and a small portion of scrambled eggs. Still the leftovers. In that moment I realized this isn't just about food. My entire life has been filled only with what's left behind. I quietly put the bread in my mouth. It wouldn't go down my throat. I felt like crying but held it back. Crying at this table would only be my problem alone. A few days later one afternoon, I was sitting on the sofa after finishing the dishes. David went into the bathroom, leaving his phone on the living room table. Then vibration sounds kept ringing. At first I tried to ignore it, but the sound wouldn't stop. Thinking it might be urgent, I looked at the screen. The screen showed a group chat called Family Chat. The profile picture showed my mother-in-law smiling in front of a cake. Mindlessly scrolling through the screen, my eyes caught the previous night's conversation. My hand stopped. My heart started racing. It was a text from my mother-in-law. "Helen hasn't contributed anything to this house anyway. She doesn't even earn money." Below that was David's reply, "Right, Mom. That's why we should keep the house and savings only in my name. So she can't take half later if anything happens." I held my breath and scrolled down further. My fingers trembled. My mother-in-law wrote again, "Exactly. A daughter-in-law can be replaced anytime, but you can't replace blood family." The moment I read that sentence, my heart sank. I couldn't breathe. I've maintained this house my whole life, but I was nothing in this house. I quickly pressed the screenshot button. My fingertips felt numb, without sensation. Only when I saw the notification that the photo was saved did I exhale. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I couldn't cry. If I cried, they'd say I was being sensitive again. That I was emotional, overreacting. I bit my lip hard. I tasted blood in my mouth. I heard the bathroom door opening. I quickly put the phone back in its place and headed to the kitchen. David came out asking, "What are you doing?" "Nothing," I answered, trying to keep my voice from shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. Lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I kept thinking about those text messages. Helen hasn't contributed anything to this house. All the things I'd done for 30 years passed through my mind. The breakfasts I prepared at dawn, the nights spent in hospitals. The time spent cleaning, doing laundry, grocery shopping. Did none of that count as contribution? Was it worthless unless it could be converted to money? The next evening, I called my daughter Amy. My hands shook so much I could barely dial the number. "Amy," I called, and my voice cracked. My daughter asked, "Mom, what's wrong?" "I saw something strange today," I said. Then my mouth wouldn't open. I didn't know where to start. Amy waited quietly. Then she said, "Mom, take your time." "What happened?" I took a deep breath and told her about the text messages. "Grandma and Dad said I haven't contributed anything to the house. So they're planning to exclude me from inheritance." Amy was silent for a moment. Then she spoke firmly but gently. "Mom, there's free legal counseling at the Tacoma Community Center. Let's go together this Saturday. You're not alone." Hearing those words, tears burst out. The tears I'd been holding back broke free. After crying for a while, I could finally say thank you. Amy said, "Mom, everything you've done your whole life has value. You deserve to have it recognized." After hanging up, I sat on the bed for a long time. Outside the window, I could see the lights of downtown Tacoma. Far away, headlights on I-5 highway stretched long into the distance. From that night, I started preparing. I opened old drawers looking for hospital bill receipts. From 15 years ago when my mother-in-law was hospitalized until recently. Bills charged to my card were piled high. I found pay stubs too. Wage statements from the Seattle restaurant, supermarket, deli. I recalled where all that money went. It all went to living expenses, food costs, medical bills. I also pulled out credit card statements. Records of grocery shopping, pharmacy prescriptions, home repairs, utilities. All charged to my card. While gathering documents, I realized something. My contribution to this house wasn't visible, but it definitely existed. And I could prove it. I carefully placed the documents in a white envelope. Closing the envelope, I muttered, now. I need to prepare to protect my own life. At that moment, I heard a key turning in the front door. David was back from his Uber driving shift. I quickly put the envelope deep in the drawer and closed it. But a decision had already formed in my heart. I wouldn't sit quietly in front of a plate of leftovers anymore. Saturday afternoon at the Tacoma Community Center's free legal counseling office. In the small room sat a desk and 2 chairs. The sound of a copy machine and keyboard typing mixed in from the hallway. Amy held my hand. It'll be okay, Mom. We're just getting consultation, so don't be too nervous. But I couldn't relax. My palms were sweaty, my heart raced. The door opened and attorney Daniel Reed entered. He appeared to be in his early 40s. He smiled warmly and offered a handshake. Mrs. Helen Parker, right? Please tell me slowly what brought you here today. I took out my phone and showed him the text message screenshots. My hand shook so much I could barely hold the screen steady. Daniel read the screen quietly. His expression became serious. Then he asked me, are these messages from conversations between your husband and mother-in-law? Yes, I answered. My voice was caught in my throat. This is about me. That I haven't contributed anything to the house. I've maintained this house my whole life. But I don't know if this is just a joke or if they're serious. Daniel nodded. Then he asked, how is the house ownership arranged? Have you obtained the property deed from the county recorder's office? No, I answered. I don't know exactly what that is. Amy spoke up. I'll take Mom to the Pierce County recorder's office to get it. That's the property ownership certificate, right? Daniel said, yes, that's correct. Once you see that document, you'll know exactly whose name the house is in. Come back after checking that, and I can give you specific consultation. After leaving the counseling office, Amy and I headed straight to the Pierce County recorder's office. It was an old building in downtown Tacoma. I told the counter clerk the address and requested the property deed. The clerk typed on the computer and handed me a printout. I received the document with trembling hands. Property deed was written in large letters at the top. The moment I checked the owner's name, my heart sank. Margaret Collins, with small letters below stating, borrower David Collins. My name wasn't anywhere, even though I'd lived in this house for 30 years. Amy wrapped her arm around my shoulders. Mom, your money went into the down payment too. You paid a lot of hospital bills with your card too. But the document didn't show any of that. Legally, I had no connection to this house at all. That night when I got home, I opened the old drawer again. I took out hospital bill receipts, pay stubs, credit card statements one by one. These were things I'd collected over 30 years. Hospital admission fees, rehabilitation costs, prescription receipts piled high, all charged to my card. There were pay stubs too. From my first paycheck as kitchen assistant at the Seattle restaurant, through supermarket checkout, to the deli kitchen. Records showing where the money I earned went. Putting them one by one into the white envelope. I thought this is evidence of my contribution to this house. It wasn't visible, but it definitely existed. Closing the envelope, I muttered, now. I need to have documents to protect my own life. At that moment, I heard a key turning in the front door. David was back from his Uber shift. Hey, what are you doing? He asked, entering the living room. I put the envelope in the back of the drawer and answered quietly, nothing. But a resolve had already formed in my heart. I wouldn't live quietly enduring anymore. The following Monday, I went back to see Attorney Daniel. Amy came with me too. I spread the property deed and the envelope of collected documents on the desk. Daniel examined them carefully one by one. After looking through them for a while, he said, Mrs. Helen, Washington State has a community property concept. So marriage duration and contribution are important. Even if the house is in your mother-in-law's name. If evidence shows how much you've contributed to caregiving and living expenses, it can be reflected in property division. Really? I asked. I couldn't believe it. Daniel nodded. Yes, the receipts and pay stubs you brought can be important evidence. It clearly shows you bore a significant portion of your mother-in-law's medical bills and living expenses. Then what should I do now? I asked. Daniel explained, first, it's best to try talking with your husband. Before legal proceedings, if you can resolve it within the family. That's always best. If dialogue doesn't work, you can file for family court mediation. I nodded, but a corner of my chest felt heavy. Talking with David wouldn't be easy. Leaving the counseling office, Amy said, "Mom, you can do this. You're not alone, so don't be too scared." That night, I lay in bed looking out the window. The lights of downtown Tacoma were twinkling. Somewhere far away, someone was starting a new day. I needed to prepare for a new beginning too. Not as someone who sits quietly in front of a plate of leftovers, but as someone who boldly demands their fair share. The following Sunday lunch, several relatives were visiting the Tacoma house dining room. My mother-in-law's distant cousin and church friends. The table was laden with roast chicken and mashed potatoes that Margaret had carefully prepared. The sound of the oven opening filled the house with the smell of roasting meat. My mother-in-law selected the biggest chicken leg and the best-cooked portions, placing them on a large plate in front of David. "My son worked so hard. This is all yours." David smiled brightly and said thank you. The relatives laughed and echoed agreement. "Your mother's cooking really is the best." In front of me sat yesterday's leftover salad, cold pasta, and dried bread on a small plate. "Just like always," my mother-in-law said in front of the relatives. "I worked blood and sweat to get this house. When I die, it all goes to David. Why should a daughter-in-law who did nothing get to share it?" Two relatives laughed awkwardly. One said, "Still, Helen has suffered for a long time." But my mother-in-law waved her hand. "Suffered? That's a daughter-in-law's duty, that's all." The moment I heard those words, something inside my chest snapped. Something I'd endured for 30 years crumbled in an instant. I quietly put down my fork. The metal made a small sound against the plate. Everyone's eyes turned to me. I stood up. My legs trembled, but I stood straight. I went to the kitchen counter, picked up the white envelope I'd placed there, and set it down in the center of the table. David asked, "What's that?" I spoke slowly. "This is the conversation you and Mother had when I wasn't around. About how I've contributed nothing to this house." I opened the envelope and showed them the text message screenshots. My mother-in-law's face turned white. David stammered, breaking out in cold sweat. "That was just Mom worrying. It wasn't meant for you to see." I pulled out a copy of the property deed and spread it on the table. "This is the house ownership document. My name isn't anywhere, even though I've lived in this house for 30 years. Then I took out the stack of hospital receipts. And this shows how much money and time I spent on Mother's care." The relatives glanced at the documents with flustered expressions. The air grew heavy. My mother-in-law shouted, "How dare a daughter-in-law do this to her elders?" I answered quietly, "If you're an elder, you should see your daughter-in-law as a person too. I've eaten only leftovers for 30 years. Now I'm going to fill my own life first." David stood up and said, "Helen, what are you doing?" "Everyone's watching." "Right," I answered. "Everyone should watch. They should see how long I've endured, how I've been treated in this house." My mother-in-law slapped the table with her palm. Get out. Get out of this house right now." I nodded. "Yes, I'll leave. There's no reason for me to stay here anyway." I went into the bedroom and took out the small suitcase I'd hidden in the closet. I'd been preparing it little by little for days. I'd packed a few changes of clothes, toiletries, important documents. I took the emergency money envelope from the drawer. Money I'd saved bit by bit over several years. Not a lot, but enough to live on for a while. I grabbed my personal bank book too. The balance wasn't much, but it was the only account with my name on it. The sound of closing the suitcase zipper echoed in the room. I looked around this room where I'd lived for 30 years for the last time. Through the window, I could see the Tacoma backyard. The tree David and I had planted together when we first moved in had grown tall. I came out to the living room where everyone stood with frozen expressions. David said, "You're really leaving?" "Yes," I answered. "Now I'm going to set my own table. With warm things, not leftovers." The moment I opened the front door and stepped out, raindrops touched my face. It had started raining at some point. I heard the sound of suitcase wheels rolling over the wet sidewalk. I didn't look back. I just kept walking forward. I headed for the bus stop along the Tacoma street. I got on the bus and looked out the window. Rainwater streamed down the glass. Tears also ran down my cheeks, but strangely, my heart felt light. Because for the first time, I was walking a path of my own choosing. That evening, in an old studio apartment near downtown Tacoma, Amy had urgently found it for me. The rent was cheap but clean, and most importantly, it was the first space under my own name. Outside the window, headlights from cars on I-5 highway stretched long into the distance. The rain was still falling, and I could hear tires passing over wet pavement. On the narrow table beside the small sink, I set out warm rice, scrambled eggs, and salad I'd made myself. My first dinner made with groceries Amy had bought for me. Steam rose from the plate. Looking at that steam, I muttered, "This is the first time in my life I've set a table just for myself." The moment I put the first spoonful in my mouth, tears rolled down my throat. Along with the hot rice, the tears I'd been holding back poured out. Joy, sadness, emotions I couldn't name rushed in all at once. After crying for a while, I felt hungry. I ate the rice slowly. Chewing each bite, I felt it. How precious this warmth was. Then my phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen. After hesitating for a while, I pressed the call button. I heard David's voice. "Helen, what are you doing? Think about Mom's age too. If we get divorced at this age, we're both finished." I looked out the window and said, "I was already finished at your dinner table long ago." I heard David sigh through the phone. "I'm scared too," he said. "I'm retired, I don't have much money. I thought if I could at least get Mom's house, I'd be comfortable in old age." It seemed like the first time he was being honest. But I had to speak my heart too. "Were you the only one scared about retirement?" "I was more scared of my old age. Eating only leftovers at your table until I disappeared." David couldn't say anything. After a long silence, he asked, "So what are you going to do now?" "I consulted with a lawyer," I answered. "I'm going to claim my fair share legally. I hope you'll cooperate, but I'll proceed either way." As I was about to hang up, David said, "Helen, I'm sorry." "I mean it." I stayed silent for a moment. Then answered, rather than saying sorry, "I wish you'd shown it through actions." After hanging up, I sent a message to Amy. "I'm so scared right now, but did I do the right thing?" Amy's reply came quickly, "Mom, your life is finally starting now. I'll help you look into family court mediation procedures. You're not alone." Reading that message, I smiled for the first time. Having my daughter on my side felt like the most reassuring thing in the world. I lay down on the bed. It was a narrow single bed. But for the first time in 30 years, it was my own space. Looking at the ceiling felt unfamiliar but also free. Outside, the rain still fell. Listening to the rain, I thought, when this rain stops, a new morning will come. That night I slept deeply. For the first time in a long while, peacefully without nightmares. The next morning, sunlight came through the window. When I opened the curtains, downtown Tacoma spread before my eyes. It was a small studio, but to me it felt like the widest space in the world. I made coffee and drank it. Coffee I drank alone, but it was warm. Coffee drunk without watching anyone, it tasted this good. Amy called. "Mom, are you okay today?" "I'll come at lunchtime." "I'm fine," I answered. Because I really was fine. In the afternoon, Amy came with deli food. We sat at the small table and shared sandwiches together. "Mom, you look so much more relaxed," Amy said. "Do I?" I asked, and she nodded. "Yes, you seem like a completely different person from when you were at the old house." Hearing those words, I realized something. How tense I'd been living all this time. Always watching others, being careful, enduring. Amy pulled out an envelope of documents. "Mom, Attorney Daniel prepared the family court application. Just review it and sign." I read through the documents. They requested property division and living expense payments. It was a procedure to legally recognize what I'd contributed for 30 years. My hand trembled as I picked up the pen to sign. But I wrote my name clearly. "Helen Parker." "This is just the beginning," Amy said. "You have the right to demand this." I nodded and looked out the window. People were walking along Tacoma streets. I could see everyone living their own lives. "I'm going to live my own life now too," I muttered. A few months passed. The family court mediation process was underway. And I was living quietly in my studio. I'd started part-time work at the neighborhood deli. Simple work, making and displaying salads. But I felt proud living on my own paycheck. One early morning, I got an urgent call from David. "Helen, Mom fell at home." She hurt her hip. We're at Tacoma General Hospital emergency room now. My heart sank. I resented my mother-in-law. But she was still someone I'd cared for 15 years. I quickly got dressed and headed to the hospital. When I arrived at the emergency room, David was sitting in a corridor chair. His face was pale. They say she needs surgery, he said. They need a guardian's signature, and if you could watch her at night. I answered quietly, legally, the guardian is the son, David. You have to sign. David looked flustered. But you've always done the caregiving. I'll help as much as I can, I said. But I can't be a free caregiver like before. David couldn't respond to that. The surgery went smoothly, and my mother-in-law was moved to a regular room. A few days later, the hospital medical social worker requested a family consultation. In the small counseling room sat David, me, and the social worker. The social worker spoke in a kind but firm voice. If long-term hospitalization and rehabilitation are needed, family members should take turns caring for her or hire a paid caregiver. We don't recommend placing all the burden on one person. David looked at me with a troubled expression. Helen has always done it. The social worker asked, Mrs. Helen, what's your opinion? I took out the envelope of documents I'd prepared. It was the opinion letter that attorney Daniel Reed had written. I handed it to David. I'll participate in caring for Mother to some extent. But I need a promise that I'll receive court-determined living expenses and recognition of my share when the house is settled later. David unfolded the documents and read. His expression grew increasingly stiff. It outlined decades of caregiving and domestic labor contribution, and the necessity of property division and living expense payments. This is, David stammered, isn't this excessive? It's not excessive, I answered. It's fair compensation for what I've done for 30 years. I won't work for free anymore. The social worker said, if the family can't reach agreement, we recommend court mediation. Caregiving burden should be divided fairly, and economic compensation should be discussed. Leaving the hospital, David said, are you really going to take this to court? If you cooperate, we don't have to, I answered. Over the following weeks, negotiations continued. Attorney Daniel mediated, and eventually an agreement was reached in family court mediation. David agreed to pay me a portion of his 401k and retirement funds, and a certain percentage when the house was eventually sold. He also agreed to send a set amount of living expenses to my account monthly. For my mother-in-law's care, David would take primary responsibility. But I would help about 2 days a week. Even that would be paid at an hourly rate. On the day we signed the mediation agreement, I ran into David in the courthouse corridor. He said with a tired face, did it have to come to this? I answered quietly, if you'd seen me as a person, it wouldn't have come to this. David couldn't say anything. Leaving the courthouse, Amy held my hand. Mom, you did really well. I nodded and looked up at the sky. It was a clear day. A blue sky stretched out without a single cloud. I muttered to myself, now the price of my life's table is what I pay myself. A few more months passed. Spring came. Cherry blossoms began blooming on Tacoma streets, and the air was warm. I still worked at the neighborhood deli. It was part-time, but it was a place that valued me. The deli owner Mark liked my cooking skills. One day Mark said, Helen, your homemade salad is really popular. Customers keep asking for it. I put on my apron and placed the warm vegetable stir-fry and salad I'd just made on the display counter. Fresh ingredients I'd prepared that morning. An elderly couple came in and asked, this food, it's not made from yesterday's leftovers, is it? I smiled brightly and answered, no, here we don't make anything from leftovers. Everything is freshly made today, from scratch. Speaking those words, I realized something. My life now wasn't being filled with leftovers either, but made fresh. After work, I returned to the studio and prepared dinner. I filled my plate with warm soup, bread, and salad. Only things I liked. Sunset was visible outside the window. The sun was setting between downtown Tacoma buildings. The orange sky was beautiful. Suddenly I remembered what my mother-in-law used to say. In the end, all a person leaves behind is their house. Looking at the sunset, I said quietly, now I want to leave myself behind, not a house. Not as someone's daughter-in-law, but as Helen Parker. On the weekend, Amy's family came to visit. My grandson Jason came too. It was a small studio, but we all sat around the table together. I distributed the food I'd made to everyone. Warm chicken soup, homemade bread, salad. A small table, but it was full. Jason said, "Grandma, the food here tastes so much better." Amy said with a smile, "Mom, you look so relaxed these days. You seem like a completely different person from when you were at the old house." "Do I?" I asked, and everyone nodded. I turned on the small radio and played quiet jazz music. The music softly filled the room. And I said quietly, "If my story sounds like your story, I hope you can find the courage to quietly stand up from a table that only gives you leftovers. And put something warm on your own plate first." Amy held my hand. "Mom, I'm so proud of you." I looked out the window. Lights were coming on one by one in downtown Tacoma. People in their own homes preparing their own dinners. That night, after everyone left and I was alone doing dishes, I thought when I first left the house. I was scared, but I have no regrets now. Because in front of me wasn't a plate of steaming leftovers, but a full dinner on a clean white plate that I'd set myself. The next morning, on my way to work at the deli, I passed the Tacoma Farmers Market. Vendors selling fresh vegetables and fruits were working energetically. An elderly woman was selecting tomatoes. She looked about 70. She asked the vendor, "These were picked this morning, right?" The vendor smiled and answered, "Harvested at 5 this morning. I only brought the freshest ones." The grandmother smiled brightly and bought the tomatoes. Watching her, I thought she's also choosing the best for herself. I should live that way too. Giving myself the best first, not leftovers. Arriving at the deli, I put on my apron and prepared today's menu. I made salad with fresh vegetables from the farmer's market. Customers came in one by one. A woman looked at the salad and asked, "Did you make this yourself?" "Yes, I made it this morning," I answered. "With the freshest ingredients." She smiled and said, "It looks delicious. It seems to have love in it." Those words warmed my heart. Love. Yes, because now I make it with love for myself. In the evening, I finished work at the deli and headed home. Walking along Tacoma streets toward the studio. A small home, but a space under my own name. I opened the door and warm air greeted me. The heat I'd left on before going out was still there. I opened the refrigerator and took out tonight's ingredients. Salmon, broccoli, lemon. Things I liked. I grilled the salmon, steamed the broccoli, squeezed lemon juice. I arranged it beautifully on a plate and set it on the table. Sitting alone eating, I thought I remembered that first plate of leftovers I received at the Tacoma house 30 years ago. I remembered what my mother-in-law used to say then. "This is enough for a daughter-in-law. Leftovers are food too." But now I know. It wasn't enough. I deserved to eat something warm too. After finishing my meal, I did the dishes and looked out the window. Stars twinkled in the Tacoma night sky. Then I remembered my mother-in-law's last words. "All a person leaves behind is their house." Looking at the stars, I said quietly, "Now I hear it differently. Even leftover life can become warm enough, depending on how I fill it." I lay in bed and closed my eyes. Today was another peaceful day. A day when I ate warm dinner I'd set myself, not leftovers. And tomorrow, the day after, and all the days to come, I'll live that way. Under the name Helen Parker, filling my own life myself. Outside the window, the lights of downtown Tacoma twinkled. One of those many lights was my small studio. Small but warm, my space. There, for the first time, I was living my life completely. Not as someone's daughter-in-law, but just as Helen. Everyone, I wonder if there is anyone who, like me, has spent a lifetime sitting at the very edge of someone else's table. Through what happened today, I learned how precious it is, even at this late age, to have the courage to put something warm on my own plate first. And to recognize my own worth. It is not too late, and I truly want to tell you that our lives are not cold leftovers, but a meal that can be warmed up again. If you have had similar experiences or feelings, please share them quietly in the comments. I believe your words will become a great comfort and strength to someone. If my story touched a small corner of your heart, I would be grateful if you would support me with a subscribe and a like and walk with me a little longer. If someone comes to your mind, I hope you will gently share this story, so that a little courage and freedom can be served on their table as well. Thank you sincerely for listening until the end. And I quietly wish that the days ahead of you will be warmer and healthier in both body and heart.